In this episode, we look at how to introduce new players to Mythras and consider whether it's worth playing an older character in a campaign. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 40, Newbie Players and Getting Older. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host Inwils and welcome to September. Yes, we have made it. This is episode 40. I really need to ensure that I keep better notes about the content of episodes because after making 40 of them, I often forget what we've actually covered. Of course, that could be related to my age and my fading memory. As the summer comes to an end and we are starting back to work and school, September is often when we return to our weekly sessions. Having a break from gaming can also revitalise campaigns and characters. I often feel I need a break from creating and playing, not because I'm bored of it, but mainly because my creative juices seem to dry up, and then I seem to get something that could be recognised and be very close to writer's block. This is one of the reasons that we play alternative games in our gaming group. Generally, we will play one or two adventures in Fantasy Mythras before swapping to Sci-Fi M-Space. The adventures can take several sessions to play through, so by the time we swap, we are generally ready for a change of rules and perhaps a change of character. Members of the gaming group, who you will be listening to later on when they talk about their experiences as new players to Mythras, also swap what they actually focus on. For example, Hazra, a combat scout, becomes Minsk, the face of the M-Space group, and Bartleby, the supporter and healer in Mythras, becomes the hard-hitting ex-law enforcer Newman in M-Space. As well as Mythras and M-Space, we have some other games lined up as well. These include the superhero game of Destined and the newly released Spelljammer D&D 5th edition, and hopefully I will be getting my teeth into starting a campaign using the After the Vampire Wars rule set. You might be thinking that that's a lot of games, but our policy within our gaming group is that as long as we are playing and enjoying it, then that's the most important thing. And according to that, we can play anything as long as we're enjoying it. I have thought about setting up a play by mail or post or internet game after playing within Matt Eager's campaign for a short period of time. But I feel I should be more realistic about the amount of games and campaigns I'm running. I guess I just really enjoy creating and playing RPGs so much. Does anyone else feel that they just don't have the time that they would like to spend playing and exploring their campaigns? Maybe we all need a big lottery win so we can dedicate ourselves completely to our passion of playing Mythras. That would certainly be a great passion to have in game. Later on in this episode, I'm going to talk about age and how this can be incorporated into your campaigns. But first up, I am joined by my long-serving members of our gaming group as we talk about the best way to support new players to Mythras as they create and develop their characters. So, welcome players. Let's start off by saying who you are and what your experience of RPGs have been so far. Take it away.
I'm Mr. Pickles. I play Bartleby Fumus in the Mythras game on Saturdays on Inwils channel. I would say I have pretty good experience. I've been playing for at least 15 years or so, mostly running games, but playing in a fair number of games.
Yeah. And you really like Traveller as well?
I've moved on from Traveller, actually. I broke up with Traveller and now I'm with Savage Worlds.
Oh!
Yeah,
now,
it's been fun.
Just to
There's
let
a
you
lot
know,
of similarities, though, with
yes.
Savage Worlds and Mythras, is they both purchase characteristics the same way, or a similar way.
So just so you know, there is an episode coming. Well, there's something being produced on for Savage Worlds that I know of. So keep an eye out for that. Ooh. Medivac, who are you?
Hello, I'm Medivac, and I play Hazard Khan on Saturday night's Mythras game. I started role-playing back in the early 80s. Started with basic D&D, went AD&D, had a slight break and went into things like Car Wars, Mech Warrior, Shadowrun, and so, Warhammer, of course. And so on and so forth. Even to the point where I bought a random game called Mutazoids. So if anybody's ever heard of that,
somebody will have.
And then that's it really. And then I went on to join Inwils with Mythras, which I thoroughly love.
Brilliant. And Captain Kangaroo, who are you? Tell us about your experience.
My experience with just in general, I think I started with Mr. Pickles, I think, back when we were younglings. And then I think we took a break, and then around college we met again, and then really actually started playing. And I think we started with Warhammer. I could be wrong.
Yeah, Warhammer Fantasy.
And then we did that transition because I think Warhammer was 1D100. Then we went to Call of Cthulhu, and then did a few years of that. I've had a few experiences here and now, but most experiences have been with Mr. Pickles. But yeah, and then of course every Saturday.
So he's to blame for everything then.
Pretty much, yeah. Like if I've had any problems, all of my bad habits are all because of him. Yeah. The drinking, all of it is because of him. No.
And you played the wonderful Sorcerer Cyrus in the Mythras game. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay then. So now that we're all introduced, I wanted to talk about character generation initially, and you were all new players who came new to Mythras, and what we're talking about here is to try to encourage other players to start with Mythras, but to give them a little bit of advice about what they need to be aware of, what do they need to think about, and maybe even remove those obstacles and any barriers that we experience coming new to the game for them. So let's talk about character generation. Mr. Pickles, let's start with you. What did you feel about character generation? What was your overall feel about it in Mythras?
I really felt that for a system like this, you need to have a very strong idea of what you want to do, because as opposed to a system that has classes where you just say, I'm the fighter and I'm going to pick this subclass of fighter, you get a lot of your options chosen for you. And with Mythras, you can make a character that's a blend of other class-based systems. Yeah. Like you can give yourself musicianship as a skill and not necessarily be a bard and have other skills that go along with it. So I think with Mythras, you really, really need to know what you want to make going in, and that'll make things a lot easier. If you just don't know what you're doing, you'll throw skills into random areas and you could end up with a character that's not really well defined.
Yeah, and Captain, you were talking about when I looked at the information that we had sort of like collated, you were saying talk about important skills and which skills are important.
So typically, what's great about this is that everyone's mostly focusing on, okay, what makes my character unique? You have specific combat styles you can create. You can, you obviously can choose from what's been created before, but if your DM is lenient, you can kind of change it up and kind of figure out different ways in which you would imagine your character to be. But there's some skills I think people look over because they're so busy putting in this specific how to make my character as well structured as possible, that people, if they don't put points into these skills, you're pretty much gonna have a hard time. I call them the saving throws, even though that's not at all what they're called in the game. Three of them would be evade, willpower, and endurance. Evade obviously prevents you from getting hit outside of being parried. Willpower prevents you from getting your mind blown or whatever. But I think endurance is most important because the way the combat is structured is you have essentially you have about 2 turns or maybe 3 depending on how good your dexterity is.
So that's the fatigue rule that we're talking about there. That comes off your constitution. So we play that rule, but other people might not play that rule.
True.
But I totally agree with you that things like evade and willpower, and to some extent endurance and brawn. Is often the case. Well, how did you find the character generation, Medivac?
Initially, when I first looked at the book, I was like, oh my God. Because, when you're so used to going, I'm going to roll some dice, I'm going to put points here, there, blah, 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 done. But then when I got my head around it by reading the sagas, which were amazing in there, it's a great way to lead you through the instructions of how to do things. And then I could look at the book and go, right, I'm going to build Hazra how I would see him at 23 years old. What would his life skills be? What would he have learned? And so on and so forth. And that's a character I built. And I found it's great to build a complete character at that age, because that's what you are literally doing. You are completing your character there. And then from then on, he's growing. He's learning new life skills. He's learning new ways to fight. With Hazra, for example, he's going to trances and whatnot there. So that's a big thing. But it is initially, like I say, I found it very daunting. But once I delved my feet into there, it's fantastic. You just go with it, and you've, like Mr. Pickles said, you do have to have a concept, an idea of where that character is at that point, and then you build on that. So that's how I found it personally anyway. Yeah,
and I think Mythras is always built to be adaptive and to be changed and altered all the time. Mm-hmm. What did you feel about the different levels of your journey? You sort of like start off with the culture, you look at the culture, and then you look at your profession and things like that. How did you feel as players? Because I think that's quite unique. I might be wrong, from your experience, but I thought that was quite unique compared to other fantasy games. Anyone can go for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when I did Hazra, I wasn't sure what I wanted to play or who I wanted to play when I first had the rule book. And then you look at the cultures and think, oh, right, yeah, barbarian, nomadic. And I went, oh, nomadic. That's great. And then you link that to the next section.
Your profession or career, yeah.
Yeah, so again, that's great, because that goes down to scouting or hunter or whatever you want to be there. And they all do interlink, which is nice. And it just adds so much of depth to it in a sense, but also in the same thing, you couldn't have a barbarian who would then have city skills, which is fantastic, because that just wouldn't work, because you don't have a barbarian going to university and whatnot, because he's a barbarian. He's grown up on wherever in a mountain. So, which is again a great thing. So you can't. That's the thing other systems don't have, where their characters can do anything they want. Once you've put down your culture, you adhere to that culture.
Yeah, and I think for anybody who's coming new to Mythras, that culture actually determines what professions and what careers you can actually engage with. Mr. Pickles, that's a bit like Traveller.
Depending on how you run Traveller, most people roll with the randomized version. I personally prefer point buy, but yeah, it has like you pick your profession and then the system says, oh, well, you didn't really do too well at being a soldier. You lost an arm and you're fired. Move on to the next career. And so that can get kind of messy like that. But I think you can sort of morph your character a little bit with the background and the profession. And then you get something like, I think I called it hobby points or yeah, you get something at the end that you can say, yes, I'm a barbarian. And yes, I'm a barbarian hunter. But I also was fascinated by the big city. So I'd try and spend some time there and understand things. And that would be you spending those limited points in a specialty skill.
Yeah. And they're called hobby points, is exactly what you said. And there would be, and I think they're designed is just like you're saying there, describing it, sort of like, so you have this opportunity to bring in a random skill, just to add that depth. What about you, Captain? Because you play a sorcerer, so a lot of yours was had to be determined with magical skills.
Well, that's what the great thing about when I made Cyrus is that I didn't want to just be a sorcerer. I didn't want him to be, kind of stand in the back and just like waving his hands around as things kind of happen around him. I also wanted him to be able to handle himself, and that's not really available at another, like say if we did Warhammer or whatnot. If you're in a class in Warhammer, you have to do specific skills that benefit a sorcerer. You can't really be a sorcerer and then also kick ass with your legs. And I kind of made mine both like a mix of a rogue and a sorcerer together, based a lot on the hobby points. So the hobby points kind of helped out into making my character more unique, and then I kind of, flesh them out from there. And so what's nice about Mythras is that the structure is kind of based on where you put your specific points. It's not determined for you. And I think was very nice when trying to create something a little different.
Yeah.
Altogether.
And I think I want to go way back, and I've got some points to pick up on. But at the beginning, you were allocating points to your characteristics, and I know, Captain, you actually, you're not pleased with that 8 size at all. But do you think that should have been explained more to you, what the characteristics actually do, how they're involved in the game? Or did you feel that there was a throwaway stat that you just thought that was gone? Or was it a carefully balanced approach that you had?
It's hard to balance it all, because if you balance it all, I think if you divide all of them, it's going to be 10 or 11. If you did like all the way even so, and obviously there's some aspects, especially with me, if I wanted to be both a fighter and a sorcerer, which is hard to, essentially you have to like mold it to fit that perfectly. And sometimes there was a throwaway characteristic. I didn't think 8 was going to be as small as what ended up being, but that's not anyone's fault outside of just happened to be my throwaway, because I wanted, I think we were structuring it to fit into your world, and your world was the Red Order, which obviously the one I wanted to go towards was more of a militaristic based order. And so I wanted a little bit of charisma, so I couldn't throw away my charisma. A sorcerer, he has to have some decent intelligence. He can't be a dumb sorcerer. It's pointless, right? But if he's gonna be a fighter, he can't suck on dexterity, he can't suck on strength. And so what ended up being the throwaway was size, which you have to, I guess, deal with, because you only got so many points to give.
Very true. Yeah. Well, what about Medivac and Mr. Pickles? How did you feel about those allocation of characteristics?
I personally feel that you need to have a character you need your character to have one characteristic that's lower. Otherwise, they're just not interesting to me. Anybody who's average or above in everything is just like, that's not very interesting from the GM perspective. And it's sometimes frustrating as a player, but I felt like that gave me a good way to my character in a more unique way. I put my dexterity and my constitution really low, so mangled hands. can't play his musician like skill anymore too well because, mangled hands, not because I put very few points into it.
Yeah. Very, very much so. What about Medivac? How did you feel with it?
Totally agree. In fact, I've got my original thing here. I mean, I totally agree with Mr. Because you said there. I mean, I put my charisma low because I knew we were going to be based in a city, and therefore Haz will be so much like a fish out of water. The fact that he wears his pajamas all the time it's going to put people off. So, and to be fair, charisma when you're out in the wilderness doesn't really matter that much because you're meeting animals. But then again, the same thing. It's also become a double-edged sword because when I try to influence people, based on the charisma skill, it's harder to get that skill now up because it was a 7, so it's like.
It's really low, yeah.
Yeah. And again, with my power, my spell power, the power, I chose that quite low as well because I never thought I'd be doing anything like animism or whatever, because it's the journey in Hazra's life. He was just a hunter. So it's something he wouldn't have focused on, but that's why his dex is quite high, his size is tall, and so on. But yeah, they do have a huge impact on your character, and it's nice to have this slight flaw in there.
I totally agree. Yeah.
But then again, don't be a mage who has 2 strength because you won't want to lift your staff.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point because I think the game is very well balanced. That if you drop one too low to get another one too high, you automatically get that negative vibe of it. How much did you all have ideas for your characters, and did that impact on the process you took through the character generation? Was the character generation system could it adapt to meet your character, your vision of your character, or did you sort of like change your vision as you went through?
I read the cultures first, and then I once I'd seen the nomad, I went, okay, what can the nomad do? I went, oh yes, it can scout and so on and so forth. And then from that point, I made Hazra in my head. Got that image of him, what he would be doing, and so on. And then from that point, I then progressed.
So the culture was the real starting point. Yeah.
And then once I visualized what he would be doing, and where he was going to be going, and how he would get there, then I progressed through the rest of the character generation.
Brilliant.
With mine, I had a kind of a few characters. Like I think a lot of people like to kind of mold together different pop culture references or pop culture characters out there to kind of, the base your character off of. I think I did initially was, if anyone's seen Game of Thrones, Barry Martell, he was the Red Viper guy. Specifically it was his fighting capability, which was he had a spear and he did a lot of flips and whatnot.
Right.
But at the same time, I also wanted to mold in what was missing from our character group at the time, which I think was a DPS magic user. Yeah, essentially. We had a healer at the time. We had Rogue, of course, with Hazra, and then we had a tank. So I wanted to kind of fill up that missing space, that void. So I kind of molded those two things together. Now, initially, it was going to be like a suave, very, guy who spends a lot of time at the taverns and whatnot, and just. But at the same time, I think we molded to essentially a person with like a Neapolitan complex.
Yeah,
and kind of the best way to describe it is someone who thinks they're significantly larger in life than they actually are.
Mr. Pickles, you play the theist, so did you feel that a lot of the order, the religion, developed Bartleby, or did you have your own vision for him?
Yeah, I went in, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to play a support character that wasn't necessarily on the front lines, just the healer, the helper, buffs, all that good stuff. I wanted to bring knowledge skills so that I could give information to the party. Sort of a passive kind of character, but so I went into it knowing that's what I wanted. I wanted to be healer and buffing and that kind of thing. And I remember looking at the professions, and I saw priest, and I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I saw doctor or physician or something, and I was like, ooh, I could do all kinds of science-based stuff. And I remember you going, please, Pickles, please. I don't know. I don't think you're gonna like doctor. And coming forward now, I'm like, yeah, I would have hated doctor, not being able to like fix things perfectly. But that's where I had my character idea. And when I hit the background of civilized, it's like, well, none of this has anything to do with what I wanted to do. And that's where it brought out, okay, so what was Bartleby before he became a theist and a helper? And so that's where I brought in the idea of, okay, well, I get musicianship. Maybe he wanted to be a bard and things changed once he hit the profession.
Yeah. And I think that's, I feel the Mythras character generation system is really good, and it really allows you to mold a character. But if you haven't got an idea, it helps you create that. I've got two more questions before we finish. The first thing, do you think, say you made a really bad mistake in your character generation, do you think the system allows you to recover from that? What about the character advancement? What do you feel about that system?
Personally, I think you adapt. If you've made a mistake in your character generation, in your stats, or whatever, you do adapt. It's like Captain Kangaroo. Which is not a mistake, really. It's just his character, isn't it? The fact that he's 3'2", and but he's adapted. He's now that is now part of his character. So
very much so.
Yeah, you just mold that character that you've made into what you want him to be using those characteristics. That's how I feel, anyway.
Yeah,
personally. Yeah,
and I know Bartleby started with a low endurance.
Yeah,
skill.
I think with skills, there's a lot of room to recover from that. Like, you have low constitution, so therefore your endurance is really low, and it's like, okay, but you can work on that. I think that's part of telling a story, is having your characters work on something and overcome obstacles. Mm-hmm. But attributes, the characteristics, that's a little bit more difficult to make up for. And I think that's really true for a lot of stories, is if you are short, you don't really fix that. You overcome it with your skills. If you've got asthma, you don't necessarily overcome that. You develop ways to skillfully get around your flaws or your weaknesses.
Captain, anything to contribute to that?
Yeah. So I use that anecdote with Cyrus. He also lower endurance. I think that's why I emphasize endurance as much as possible when doing character creation. I think it's an extremely important skill. But when he had low endurance, essentially what it did is, if it had him, instead of doing physical activity too much with his combat style, he ended up having to focus more on magic. And honestly, that makes sense. As a magic user who's trying to develop his way up the ranks, you would eventually use more magic, so that way you get better at it, more practice and whatnot. It makes at least a good story, sense. But what I enjoy most about leveling is that your leveling is based on what specificities you want in your character. It's not based on, like, for example, in D&D, it might be different. I haven't played 5th edition, but I don't think. But if when you upgrade your character, pretty much you essentially level up, and then you get a whole bunch of skills that are automatically kind of giving you an option to level up. Well, this one, you can, I guess, like, be a sorcerer or a rogue, and then decide, what, I'm going to work on my bakery or something, or I'm going to work on different little hobbies I decide I think is going to benefit me in the story, or for some reason or whatnot. You can pick options that would benefit you in ways that your career choice would not allow, essentially. What I think is very very nice, and what makes it kind of a different experience altogether. But and
I think the important thing to remember is that the current system, although endurance is an important skill, for example, a priest doesn't have access to that in their career. They would have to up it with hobby skills or something else. And I think, from my point of view as a DM or a game master, because I was learning with you, I was suddenly thinking, oh, that skill is important. Or that skill. Yeah, go for it, Medivac.
It's like brawn with Hazra. I mean, I thought brawn fighting, didn't think anything of it until I tried to pull my spear out of something that impaled. And, it just never happened. That's one thing that Hazra worked on. He worked on building up his muscles, putting points into his brawn, and so on. But going back to characteristics, if you do make a mistake or wish to up something, there is a way of doing that, isn't there, in Worlds? Where
there is, yeah.
Add experience points each time to to upper level.
Yeah, it's only to certain skills, certain characteristics. But if you increased your strength by 5 points, then every time there was an experience roll, you would have to commit 5 rolls to that increase, which is quite logical in my head, because you have to keep doing that working out. Otherwise, you're going to be, I see it very practically with the physical skills. I have real problems with size, for example.
so Cyrus is able to just like stretch a lot over a month, and then just like, oh wow, okay.
Each experience roll, you build yourself some new stilts.
A unique sense of fashion comes across. So
helps both charisma and size.
I'm going to have you all back again to talk about the different elements of the game. But just to finish off this sort of like segment, if you had to give some advice to brand new players coming to the character generation, what would be your advice to them?
One of you go first. I'll do mine last. No, I'm just joking. I think that I'm the newest of the bunch. It makes sense for me to go first on this one. Of course, what I emphasized earlier, those saving throw skills are very important. But keep in mind that the idea you have of what your character is going to be is hopefully going to develop over time. So if you plan to be in a group for a while, don't worry about making these specific like professional skills that's going to benefit what you imagine your character is going to be. You're going to get there eventually. Focus on the basics. Focus on if you're a tank fighter, obviously work on your combat style, but mostly work on things like brawn, things like your endurance. Something's going to help you last, so that way over time your character can develop and not die, because all of your needed standard skills are completely low and obliterated.
Good point. Mr. Pickles or Medivac, what would be your advice?
The biggest thing, besides anything I've already said, is talking to your GM about things, especially with things that are specific, like knowledge poisons or lore of poisons, I should say. So those things where it's like you should talk to the GM and be like, is this actually going to be useful? Does this have any relevance? Kind of like me mentioning the doctor profession to you. Is this a good choice within the story that you're making in your setting?
Yeah. And I have what I try to do as a GM, if somebody takes something, I then try to make it happen and be useful, and that I think several times in the game, I sort of like say, roll this one, to sort of like bring it up, so you don't feel that you've wasted a whole load of points on poison, then that's it. Medivac, what would be your final advice to new players?
Go into the game with a character in mind and have the full expectations that character will grow how you want them to grow. You can pretty much do anything, and it's just justifying that with your character is the most important thing, though. That's what I will say is read the book is all I'm going to say. Like I say, read those sagas because they're very well written, and just have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable advice from you all, because being those newbie players, you've developed and you've learned from mistakes or built on failures and things like that. But you still have, 3 fantastic characters and very unique characters. Thank you for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you will come back and we'll have another talk about newbies and combat or something like that.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you for having me.
Good to be here.
Much.
This is my first podcast. I'm so excited.
I'll cut that bit. I find it really helpful to talk to the group about creating characters in Mythras as complete newbies, and I hope we have provided you with some ideas and strategies if you are going to be introducing new players to your campaign. The group will be returning again to look at combat and other aspects of the game and how to approach these when introducing new players to the rule set. So stay tuned for future episodes. Remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I am always looking for reviews or interviews with people, so if you are interested, then you can send me an email at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the various forums I frequent. We have some great episodes lined up for later in the year with some new and familiar voices joining the podcast to share their expertise. So do subscribe or follow the podcast on your favourite podcasting platform. Some great episodes to come. I have to say that I am an older gentleman that plays Mythras. I started RPGs in my teenage years and have returned to gaming after a rather large chunk of time focusing on my career and work. If you are interested in those newbie days of me as a dungeon master playing RPGs when I was younger, then do check out the new live stream that I do on a Monday night on YouTube, and the videos that are available on the channel after that live performance. I've been looking at my favourite rule books and modules and campaign settings as I reminisce back to my teenage life. However, getting back to Mythras, when we are creating characters for the first time, I have noticed that there's an opportunity to create an older character rather than the usual late teen, early 20s characters that we associate with adventuring. I'm going to be making a short Mythras rule video about age, but what I would like to talk about now is that I would like to ask if the system is workable for new characters that are a lot older and maybe starting their adventuring life in their eve of their own life. The core rules allows players to choose or roll the age of their character. These are then allocated to a range of age categories, being young, adult, middle-aged, senior, and old. With each category, you get more bonus skills and background events when you create your character. This seems sensible. The older you are, the more experience you have. One thing that is important to note is that from the age category senior and old, the character starts to suffer from the detrimental effects of aging, which can be found later on in the rulebook. Although I'm really happy about the rules in the core rulebook about playing an older character, I do feel that this only touches on playing an older character in the campaign, and I might even argue that there might be a lot more to consider rather than just skills and events. So what else should we as players and GMs be considering when playing or introducing an older character into our campaigns? So first up, I would like to suggest that wealth needs to be considered. As the character has got older before they started to adventure, they would have amassed some form of wealth, whether or not this is tied up in properties or artifacts. Yes, you could say that even though they are 50 years old, they have lost everything and are turning to adventuring in order to gain some wealth or even pay off debts. But let's face it, not all older people will have failed in their previous profession. Many might have amassed quite considerable wealth, and when using or having an older character in your campaign, I think it's really important to think about how will the character be able to access this wealth and what possible impact will it have on the campaign. The second aspect that I would like to talk about an older character is about dependence. Now, I'm in the later years of my life. I'm in my 50s, mid-50s, and I don't have any dependents at all. But I am probably the exception in any world. An older character might have been married, have children, or even been married several times and have several children. Because of this, I think it's worth considering what dependence does the older character have and how are they expected to provide for these family members. I have to say at this point then, the idea that a player character is responsible for other people really gives the GM a lot to play with. When we first started to play Mythras, Hengist was looking for his lost sister, and this allowed me as a GM to incorporate this into campaigns. And in our Shadowrun adventures, Chuggerwugger played a character that had an aged mom, and again this allowed me to interrupt heists and any aspect of the Shadowrun game by a call from his mother asking him when would he be back for his tea. And finally, I think we need to consider achievements. As we get older, it is possible for us to climb that career ladder and gain ranks or titles. This is an aspect of getting older that I think could possibly have the most impact on a campaign. The reason I think this is because of the ranks in orders and the access to certain spells or magical items that these higher ranks allow characters to access. If my theist, for example, is in their mid-50s, what level have they reached in the order? Are they already high priests or priests? And the same could be true for any character that progressed within their chosen brotherhood. Spellcasters in particular would gain access to higher level spells, and combat characters might have gained prestige and honor. And I think all this needs to be considered. This final consideration is the one that I really have to think about when a new old character joins the campaign. There could be a significant difference in their skills, but also any aspect of the game that their progression has allowed them to engage with. Not only will they be or could be higher ranks in their orders, but also their knowledge and understanding of the world in which the adventure party is adventuring. For them, it would be real life knowledge. Well, for the rest of the younger players, it would be considered history. So do these older characters have a lot more knowledge that they have amassed themselves that may or may not be linked to other skills? When considering all the above, I start to think that playing an older character in any campaign could bring a possible imbalance to the game. And if this is true, then I think I would probably actively discourage players from taking this option, rather than saying, oh, every older character has no money, no dependence, and knows nothing of the world. If this segment has made you throw up your arms in reaction to my simplistic views or lack of gaming knowledge, then please do let me know. You can message me either on the Tapper Talk forums or in the Discords. I would love to hear about success stories of playing an older character and whether it was or could have been overpowered. Of course, if you're feeling brave about responding to anything in the podcast or just want to pass on your words of gratitude and thanks, then please do feel free to leave an audio message using the link in the show notes. I will play all those messages at the end of the podcast episode. And that's it. Another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. I really do appreciate your support, so thank you so much. And do check out the Tapper Talk forums and the Discord. There are some great people there sharing their ideas within discussions. And if you are pressed for time and need a quick encounter to add to your game, then please do check out my encounter sheets in my RPG shop. As always, the links are in the show notes. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, everyone, and I will catch you all again in October when we'll be looking at how to start a campaign area from scratch. Until then, I hope all your opposed rolls succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.